Thank you for your interest in applying for a Parks and Recreation Trust Fund grant. This is video 3 of our series. This is for applicants looking to construct or renovate with a proposed project. So again, a development project, or when PARTF funds, you're using PARTF funds, they're eligible for new construction or renovation on property that the applicant has site control. So we'll talk about showing that you have site control either through ownership or a long-term lease agreement. The other part with development projects that is key is environmental review data. You will need to provide information to assess the environmental aspects of your project based on the proposed development. We'll also talk briefly about school site projects and their eligibility within the Parks and Recreation Trust Fund. So an attorney must certify that the local government has control of the entire site of a proposed development project. And this must be done by the application deadline. The project site has to be controlled by the applicant, and it must be a single contiguous site. So the type of site controls include fee simple, so you can own it with fee simple title. The lease agreement, which can be 25 or more years, because remember, any facilities that you construct must be maintained for that long. So your site agreement must adhere to that as well. And easements are also a type of site control that you may have. The attorney's certification will also list any limitations, conditions, or encumbrances that are on there. This could be easements or use agreements. Sometimes you might have share the property, or there might be a group that uses a portion of the property. You just need to list that on the site. It doesn't necessarily mean something's ineligible. We just need to be aware of your site control status for that. And as I mentioned before, only a single contiguous site projects are eligible per application. So the site control certificate, if you're applying for land acquisition, this will not apply because you do not yet have site control. Environmental review is a large section in the application document as you look through that, and it must be completed in its entirety. You want to make sure it's accurate. It will only benefit you in the long run to make sure that you have all this information in place, because the environmental aspects can cause serious project delays and impact and influence the cost that's required to build your project. So we want you to make sure that you take this part of the application very seriously. It will be reviewed by the regional consultants in the Division of Parks and Recreation as they review it, and may go through an environmental review clearinghouse as well. We want you to keep in mind that, as the goal is to minimize adverse impacts to the environment, and especially environmentally sensitive features of the site. So are you taking those into consideration with the proposed development? There may be permits that are required. So you want to keep in mind that some permits may cause serious project delays, especially if your projects require DOT, FERC, the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, or FEMA permits. The federal permits especially have longer time. So the part of contract, when it starts, it's for a 3-year period. And some of these permits and permissions can take a substantial amount of time to obtain. So we strongly, especially if you're proposing a project that has a bridge or a dam, we strongly encourage you to have permits in hand prior to applying for PARTF. That's just that much smoother and less questions. And you know exactly what you can or are not allowed to do with that. Site description is part of the environmental review. Make sure you include the park acreage for both land and water. Some of you may have a lake on your property. The topography, is it steep terrain? Is it flat? Are there lowlands? Streams, lakes, any significant natural resources that are on or adjacent to the site. And there's resources listed in the environmental review in the application that can help you find out where those are and what types of things are in the area. Past and current property use. So with this, we're just kind of looking, is this suitable for a public park? So as past use, was it an old factory? Is there potential of chemicals or adverse impacts to the soil and conditions that you're going to put a public park there? what's the current use of it if you're purchasing new property. So wetlands are the next consideration we need to look at. So there's in the application there are a whole resources page for assistance. The U.S. Army Corps of Engineers are the most, the best resource for wetlands. But you want to make sure you have good information, what was there. And you'll need to attach a separate page with a map delineating the wetlands, should those be on the site. So it is possible to build the park, taking those into consideration. Floodplains. You definitely want to identify portions of the park that encompass a floodplain or a floodway, say you're along a river. This is very critical. There's more and more periodic flooding that takes place. Flood maps are available online, so please look at those and see how it meets with your property and your proposed development. Because we want to make sure that what you build stays there, is, you're able to maintain it and not have to replace or have extra expense into maintaining it. Tree and wildlife species, these are areas where you just want to, list what the predominant species zone. The Natural Heritage Program can assist with this. North Carolina Wildlife Resources Commission, the U.S. or North Carolina Forest Service are all resources that can assist. Also, sometimes cooperative extension may be able to assist, or there's a lot of times community colleges nearby where students or professors may be able to assist you with making that documentation. Continuing on the environmental review, it also includes archaeological or historic sites. They may or may not be an issue for you, but we recommend that you reach out to the State Historic Preservation Office to make sure that any of these sites are identified on the proposed project site. If there's been development on the project site in the past, you may already have a document or an inventory where an archaeological study has been done, and you can find that on file. Existing structures, you need to list, regardless of the age, you need to list all the existing structures and whether they will be demolished or renovated for recreational use by the proposed project. Again, if it's over 50 years old or older, please provide a photograph and any pertinent historical information with that. Utilities are also need to be listed, so confirm if there's any easements, gas lines, power lines, underground, above ground. Identify where they are, and that will also help as you place your development and identify what type of development can occur in that location. Site clearing, so any ground disturbance that you're doing, you need to identify how many acres are proposed to be disturbed or cleared for the development. If it is more than an acre, you'll be subject to the erosion control permitting. So work with your local agencies in your county and determine the types of permits that you will need to have in place for that. Some projects have to go through an additional level of evaluation called an environmental assessment. And this is noted in the application as well. And that's typically if it's a large scale project. So you're disturbing more than 10 acres or using more than $10 million in funds. That's usually when it kicks in that you have to do a full environmental assessment. If that's the case and the Division of Parks and Recreation staff determines an assessment is needed, they will contact the applicant directly if you're funded and require that you complete that prior to the contract being released. So just keep that in mind as a potential if you have a large scale project. Joint use. We did mention schools. Now this only applies to facilities that are on school property. The school system cannot be a co-sponsor. Only the local government may apply for a grant to fund public recreation facilities on property that is owned by a school administrative unit. So therefore you must show site control. So that involves either a long-term lease of the site, so you need to show that you have control over that through a joint use agreement. So please, if the PARTF staff needs to approve that agreement before an application may be considered for funding. So if you're doing this, go ahead and reach out to your RRS regional consultant We have samples of joint use agreements. We can discuss the project that's proposed. And again, you can send it to us. We can review it with the state parks grant staff and make sure that it's eligible before you apply. Keep in mind that only recreational facilities not generally provided at schools are eligible. So, for example, building a soccer field at a high school property would not be eligible because typically high schools have soccer fields. But a soccer field or a football field would be eligible at an elementary school site. So again, PARTF will not fund things that the school systems typically fund, those type of facilities. So it depends on those. So if you're thinking about this type of project, please contact your RRS consultant and we can discuss all the options available. In this example, there is a swimming pool. That is something that is considered at times because those are not typically provided by the school system. So it can be a good joint use arrangement in agreement for that type of facility. So that's all for our development video. We wish you luck in your application process. Thank you.